All right, for today you were to have read Genesis 6, 1 through 7. 7 short verses, but packed with all kinds of information and much confusion. So, how many of you don't ever remember reading that passage before? All of you, most, okay, now I'm getting some hands. So most of you don't remember reading that before. Okay, what were your impressions of what you read there? John?
It was kind of weird. I didn't know like God had like a council of people that he called his men like before the flood came and stuff.
Says you're thinking of the sons of God?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else stand out to you? Is that
God is grieved and kind of sad about what man had done.
yeah.
At that time.
And what happens as a result of that? Did you look ahead? The flood, yeah. Judgment, right. Anything else?
God decided that man shouldn't live so many years, like 220
Because of what happened there? Yeah. So, would you say that you have a lot of questions about what's going on there? Yeah. I think probably would, because it's not exactly clear what these terms might mean. And because of that, there are different ideas as to what it means. And I'm going to tell you what my idea is, and of course it's the correct one. Of course, there are those that would disagree with me. Okay, so I'll tell you what the different ideas are, and maybe you can see that some of them might make sense, or maybe some of them don't. All right, so let's look at Genesis 6. You have it open there, and we see that man began to multiply on the face of the land. And was that what he was supposed to do? Were we supposed to multiply? Yeah. God said to Adam and Eve, right? Multiply. And daughters were born to them. And then we're told the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. And they took them as their wives, any they chose. Now the question is, who are these sons of God? And who are the daughters of man? Are they anybody in particular? And then you've got the idea that the sons of God took the daughters of men as wives. And then as a result of that, as you pointed out in verse 3, the Lord said, Yahweh said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. And then verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Have any of you heard of the Nephilim before, or Nephilim? You've heard of them? Do you know what they are? Anybody? Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Mighty men. Okay, so there's lots of information, as I said, in this passage, which may be a bit confusing for us. So let's dive in here and see what we can discover. First of all, there are some who feel that the sons of God refers to fallen angels. Now, the reasoning is this. The sons of God, which is the Hebrew B'nai Elohim, occurs several times in the Old Testament. And other places where it occurs, it seems that it's talking about angels. The angels of God are called the sons of God, B'nai Elohim. All right? And so, since these angels are doing something wrong, that is, having sexual relations with human beings, and thereby, the thought is producing the Nephilim, which are giants, that was something that was very bad. So that these sons of God are fallen angels. All right, I want you to think with me and see if you can imagine what would be the problem with that interpretation. On the plus side, The only time sons of God is used in the Bible, it's used of the angels of God. What would be on the negative side? What would be a problem in seeing these as angels? What are angels? Are angels real? Yeah. What are they? I don't know. Ask them. What's an angel? Heavenly being. Okay. What's he made of? No. What's his? Of what is he composed? An angel. What kind of a being is he? A spiritual being, which means that he has no what?
Flesh.
No flesh. He has no physical body. Now, what about all the times when angels appear to people? Doesn't that show that they have a physical body? No? Why not? Why not? I saw an angel. Yeah, but he has no body. Well, yeah, well, how come I saw him then? That's the answer.
Had a vision.
Hallucinated.
Angels can apparently appear in what looks like a body, so that they can communicate with people, but that's not their permanent form. Just like there are times in the Old Testament when God appears in a human body, but is that what God's normal form is? No, and neither is an angels. Angels are spirit beings. In fact, you'll notice that one of the ways that one of the things you see about angels, especially in the Old Testament, is that they don't eat anything. Why? Well, I hate to make the comparison, but I don't know if you ever watched things like Casper the Ghost, but you put something in, it just drops right out because there's nothing there. There's no physicality. So if an angel put a piece of meat in his mouth, it would just drop right through, I suppose, because he's not really a physical being. He just has the appearance of that. Does that make sense? All right. If he is a spiritual being, not physical, then what's the problem with this understanding? And what was happening here with the sons of God and the daughters of men? What would be the problem? If they're not physical beings, but spiritual beings.
They can't have sexual relations with women and man.
Right. They can't have sexual relations with a human because they don't have physicality. And in order to do so, they would have to be able to create actual physical bodies, not just the form, what it just looks like. They would have to be able to create actual physical bodies for themselves in order to accomplish that. You follow? Does that make sense? But we know that they can't do that because only God can create from scratch, out of nothing, something, some physical being, right? Are you following? So I think that's a big problem for seeing this. Now, that is the position that many Jewish people held in ancient times. It is the position that most commentators, pastors, theologians hold today. But it seems to me that there's a problem there because they're spirit beings. The other problem is this. You guys point.
Sir, wasn't Goliath half giant from Giant Race?
Goliath was a giant, yeah. So we have, that's another issue, and that is that Nephilim did not only occur right here, but when the children of Israel came into the land of Canaan, they said there are giants there are Nephilim and Anakim. Well, if Nephilim are simply the product of a fallen angel, a demon mating with a woman, then how did those giants get there? Yeah, good point. That's another issue, another problem. The other one is, what's the other one? I was about to give you. There's no physicality. Oh, and that is what you guys were pointing out is what was the result of this activity? What was the end result of this activity? Judgment by way of a flood, right? Who did that punish?
Every man.
Right. Did it punish the angels?
No.
No. So it had nothing to do with angels. I mean, the angels were gone. Look, God's punishing all the people for what we did. That just wouldn't make sense to me. Okay, so that idea, I think, has some problems. Well, and many people in the past have recognized the problems with that too. And so they came up with a different idea. They said, well, we know it's got to be physical beings. And so we think that these are really the descendants of Cain. Remember, Cain was the one who did what? Killed his brother by name of Abel. And God said, you're going to wander, you can't stay here, you got to go. And so his descendants continued to be sinful. And so the idea is, since it has to be a physical being, it can't be a spirit being, that the sons of God are referring to the descendants of Cain, who are, it would be the descendants of Seth, who was the godly line, intermarrying with the descendants of Cain, who are the daughters of men. You know, Cain is representative of men. Seth would be representative of the godly people. So basically, this is intermarriage between believers and unbelievers, between followers of God and those that weren't following God. Okay, what's the problem with that? You see any problems there? The sons of God are the descendants of Seth, and the daughters of men are the descendants of Cain.
I'm not for sure, but I don't think Abel and Cain had wives.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, when Cain was kicked out, he took with him his wife and children and named the city, built a city, named it after his son. Is any other possible problems with that? Well, evidently, the sons of God are of what gender? Male. And the daughters of men are what gender?
Female.
So, did Seth only have female descendants? Did Cain only have male? Or, I'm sorry, I kind of mixed up again. Did Seth only have male descendants and Cain only female descendants? Of course not. So why was it just the males of one and the females the other? So how did that work out? And is that to say that every person that was a descendant of Cain was disobedient to God? I don't know if we could say that, or vice versa. There's nothing indicating in the text that these are believers and non-believers at all. And so I think that one kind of falls a little short too, because there's nothing in the text that indicates anything about these being the descendants of anyone in particular. The third perspective, I think, is the accurate one. And it has some problems too. And that is that the sons of God are despotic rulers. I know that's a word that you know, right? Anybody know what the word despotic means? Where someone is a despot? It means that they're a dictator. They're a tyrant. All right? And so think about this. In the ancient world, and we even have stories of these kind of people in Greek mythology, as well as the Bible. You have people men that grow large, that are big and strong, maybe even giants, like it talks about in this passage as well. And I think that when it says that there were Nephilim in the land, that's talking about the same thing as these sons of God. These are big, strong guys, and what happens in that kind of a culture where there's warfare and different things, the guy that's big and strong are going to take over. And so these guys They became rulers. They became, because they're the biggest and strongest, they became the rulers. You know how easily that could happen, right? And so they became so self-centered. They became so twisted in their minds of how important they were and how no one could go against them. And we actually find an example of this back, I think it's a chapter earlier with Lamech. Lamech brags to his wives, hey, I'll kill somebody just for insulting me. That's the kind of guys these were. And so what does it tell us they did? What was the big sin? It says that they saw the daughters of man were attractive. So they're just looking at women in general, saying women are attractive. So what did they do about it? They took as their wives any they chose. So what's the issue here? What's the issue of what was done? What was done wrong? What was wrong with what these guys did? Which means what? Speak up.
Any of them, and like it doesn't matter who number.
Yeah. Or to whom they might belong. So basically what it's saying is this, any woman they saw that they thought looked pretty attractive, they just took her. They took any women they wanted for their wives. That's not what God intended, is it? And they only did it because they were big and powerful and strong. They took whatever women they wanted. And that's just an example of how evil man's heart had become. Because it wasn't just the big, strong guys, the sons of God. That kind of evil had permeated all of society. But God saw it particularly in these guys. And so that's why he was so upset. Okay, let's look and see if that fits. So the sons of God, the big, strong tyrants, saw daughters of men were attractive. And so just based on their physical appearance, they took anybody that they saw that they wanted, they took them as their wives. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days will be 120 years. I think what he's saying is that basically I'm giving him 120 years before judgment comes. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. That's who these guys are, the Nephilim. And also afterward, when the sons of God committed the daughters of men, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The sons of God were the mighty men of old. These are the men that are in the mythology. These are the men that were told in stories around the campfire. These mighty men. Now, what's the problem with this interpretation? Can you see any problems? Don't be afraid. Just because I agree with this doesn't mean there aren't problems. There's one major problem, and that is that nowhere in the Old Testament the sons of God refer to mighty men. But it is the term used in other literature of other nations around Israel at that time to refer to mighty men. So it's not in the Bible, but it is in other cultures where they use exactly this term to refer to big, strong men who are rulers who have taken over. All right, any questions? Now, and that also fits then with why God brought judgment. He didn't bring a judgment on angels. He brought it on men, on mankind. Because what these guys were doing was reflective of their culture and their society. They weren't the only evil ones. It's just that that was the worst. That was the epitome of what was happening throughout the populated earth. Any questions? Okay, well, hopefully that helps to clear up that passage of Scripture. Should you ever, by chance, read it again, you'll have an idea of what it means, hopefully. All right, now, let's go on to what happens next following the sons of God. And that is the judgment that you have mentioned, which is the flood. And what are we to think of the flood? People have different ideas about the flood as well. What are the two basic ideas about the flood? You know, well, how would you say are the two basic perspectives on what the flood was? What are the choices? John?
A worldwide flood.
Okay, it was either a worldwide flood covering the whole earth, or
Just like maybe a nation flood or national.
yeah, it's called a local flood, just like we have today, where a river overflows and there's flooding, right? Not too many weeks ago, there was flooding along the East Coast because of all the rain coming in. Anytime a hurricane comes, well, hurricane just hit Hawaii recently, and there was flooding, right? And so saying it was just a local flood, that's all. Now, how do we decide which it is? Was it a local flood or a worldwide flood? What are some things that you know that might contribute to the answer? What do you know about the flood, or what the Bible says about the flood? If you want to look down through the text there, you can. Does anybody know anything about the flood? Do you know anything about how the Bible describes the flood? Covered the earth. And are we told to what extent it covered the earth? How high did it cover the earth? Well, there's a specific topographical designation of how high the water was. It was as high as, and it covered what? The tallest mountains. Does that sound like a local flood?
No.
No, because if it covered the mountains, it'd also be flowing out over the other valleys, right? All right, what's another thing that would indicate that this is not just a local flood? What did God tell Noah to do? Build an ark. A huge boat. All right? And how long did it take him to build that, do you know? Might take too long to find it. Anybody have a guess? How long did he work on that ark?
600 years.
No, not quite that long.
150 days.
Longer than that. Are you just looking for numbers?
Yes.
It took him 100 years to build the ark. All right, now, if it was a local flood, what would have been easier for Noah to do? Build just a regular little boat? What else?
Like a raft.
Build a raft? Of course, it's going to be raining for 40 days and 40 nights for this little local flood. Shelter?
A bunker.
All right, you guys are missing the obvious. How about if he just moves over the mountain to the next valley? Wouldn't that be the easiest solution?
Yes.
Just move. Hey, there's a flood coming. Well, if that was today, you tell people to move, get out, right? There's a flood coming. You wouldn't say, well, make sure you build a huge boat. It'll take 100 years to build it. That doesn't make any sense. What else did Noah do? What was the purpose of the ark? Not only to save him, but what else?
Animals.
Yeah, all the animals. Again, if it's a local flood, why would you need to save all the animals that live in that little valley? Don't they also live in the other valleys?
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of things don't make sense with the local flood idea. So it was a worldwide flood. Now, do we have any evidence today that it was a worldwide flood? Yeah, all the layers of fossils. Now, evolutionists want to say that indicates evolution, but it doesn't. As Ken Ham says, and I won't probably quote him exactly, but he says, what would you expect if there was a flood covering the entire world? What would be the result of that? You would find layer upon layer with dead things buried in it. And what do you find if you go around the world? You find layer upon layer with dead things. Exactly what you would expect if you had a worldwide flood. And we could go into a lot of the aspects of those layers, how they had to be formed quickly. You know, people look at the layers and they say, well, this layer was took 1,000,000 years, and this next layer took 250 million years, whatever. They decide how long it took for that layer to be built up. But what they don't point out is that if a layer of ground was there that long, waiting for the next layer to be built up, there'd be erosion between the layers, and there's no erosion. If you look, even traveling down the road, you see layers sometimes of rock, and sometimes they're angled, which is interesting. That doesn't happen little by little over time, but they're straight. You go to the Grand Canyon, you can see the layers. It's not eroded between. So there are lots of evidences. Seashells up on top of mountains. You can find fossils up there. They're all over the place.
Like the opening of chasms and stuff. Like it wouldn't take it would take a worldwide flood to do all of that.
Yeah, many of the geological formations that we have today could only occur from a huge amount of water flowing through. And there are lots of examples, even so much as to look at the, I think it's called a sandstone basin of some kind that covers much of North America. There's no way for it to have covered that much area unless water deposited there. And just one thing after another, the evidence is there. Now, let's talk about the ark. Is this a good representation of the ark?
Yes.
No, because it's not that small.
What? It wasn't that small? Okay, what else? What else is wrong with this picture? Didn't look like that? Anything else wrong with this picture?
No, it's a stamp.
What? Not that many? There weren't that many animals?
There were more.
Oh, more animals. Is not enough animals? Okay, anything else? Are the animals sticking their heads out the windows?
No, it was all like locked in.
Yeah. Now, isn't this how you usually see it, though? Portrayed in pictures and storybooks, whatever, right? What's wrong with portraying it that way? This is more like what it looked. So what's wrong with picturing it like that?
It's not accurate.
It makes it look kind of like fake.
Exactly. Very good. It makes it look like a fairy tale, like just a story. In fact, that's one of the things that I think contributes to people not believing the Bible is when they go to Sunday school, they're told, okay, today we're going to hear a story about Noah and the ark. Today we're going to get a story about Daniel and the lion's den. Well, when you go to school and you hear stories, what are they? They're fables. They're fairy tales. They're not really true. And so we do the same thing in church and Sunday school and VBS sometimes. All right, so that really gives a wrong impression and helps contribute to people not believing in the true ark. Now, that's why it's so neat that Ken Ham has built an exact replica down in Kentucky, because you get to see that's what it really looked like. And it's impressive, and it's huge. Okay, here's one representation of the ark. We'll see a couple others later as well. One of the things I want to make sure you're aware of is that the story of the flood is not something that we find just in the Bible. Are you aware that there are stories around the world that talk about a worldwide flood? I'm going to tell you a few of them here. But what does that indicate? If there are stories in other parts of the world, in fact, every major civilization in history has had a flood story, of a worldwide flood. What might that tell us? If every civilization has that story. It had to come from reality. How could they each come up with a different version of the same thing unless it really happened?
You get more information to tell that it's true.
So it must be true even from that standpoint, as well as all the other evidence that we have. Here's some of the flood stories. Here's how it's described in Australia among the Aborigines. Here's how the boat is described in Central America. Here's a picture of what it looks like from Northern Europe. East Africa, picture it this way. Southern Europe, Transylvania, picture it this way. But they all have a story. Here's some more specific ones. This is in Hawaii, and the story goes like this. Long after the death of Kiniwohona, the first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place to live. There was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. Now, does that sound similar to what we have in the Bible? Not exactly, but similar enough to think that it probably came from the same source, right? We've got one man, and then the world became wicked, and Nu'u is close to Noah. He made a great canoe. Well, that's what they know in Hawaii, that's what they call it, with a house on it, filled it with animals. Waters came up all over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nu'u and his family were saved. That's pretty close, don't you think?
That's
Pretty much.
Without knowing the Bible, that's the story that they had. Here's another one. This is, I can't remember where. Somewhere in Asia. Fuhi, his son, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters. Is that part right?
Yes.
Yeah. Escaped a great flood. He and his family were the only people alive on earth. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. After the great flood, they repopulated the earth world. Is that right? Yeah. So most of the details they have there are correct. Just his name is different. There are more than 270 flood legends in the world. Interesting, and these are some of them. In China, Chinese language is not made, they don't use letters like we do, like ABC. They use symbols for ideas. So you don't construct a word by putting together letters. You construct a word by bringing together symbols of different ideas if you want to form a new term. Interesting, when you look at the word for boat in Chinese, it's made up of 3 different words put together. A vessel, 8, and people, or actually literally it's mouths. 8 mouths on a vessel equals a boat. What's that sound like? 8 people on a boat. What was that? That's Noah and his family. Now, is it just coincidence that they picked 8 for the number of people on a vessel in order to equal a big boat? I don't think so. Here's another example. Toltec Indians of ancient Mexico. They say the first world lasted that long, destroyed by a great flood, covered even the highest mountains. The few men who escaped the destruction in that long word, which means a closed chest, like that, which is closer to what the ark looked like than most of the boats that we see in our storybooks, right? Following the great flood, these men began to multiply and built a very high sakwali, or a great tower. Did that happen? Did people build a great tower after the flood? Yeah, what's it called?
Babylon.
Yeah, Tower of Babel. To provide a safe place if the world were destroyed again. And that may be the reason behind building the Tower of Babel, too. We'll see. However, the languages became confused. Is that true?
Yes.
So different language groups wandered to other parts of the world. They claim they started as a family of 7 friends and their wives who spoke the same language, crossed great waters, lived in caves, wandered until they came to southern Mexico 520 years after the Great Flood. That has a lot of authenticity to it, doesn't it? Okay, here's another one in Babylonia. It's called the Deluge. The tablet inscription. Let's see. Many people lived several hundred years at that time, which is true. The account of the flood has either been recorded by someone like King Amraphel in Genesis 14:1, who was one of the early kings of Babylonia after the flood. So he may have been the one that writes this down. Another one was prevalent at the time of Alexander the Great, who wrote of the pre-flood rulers and the great deluge that covered the earth. We have evidence of the long lives that people lived before the flood. If you're familiar with that, you see how long people lived, hundreds and hundreds of years. And then after the flood, it gets shorter and shorter. Well, there's a I'm trying to think what's called a stele, an item which is a Sumerian king's list. And this is what it says on this Sumerian writing. The flood swept over the land. After the flood had swept over the land and kingship had descended from heaven, Kish or Cush became the seat of kingship. So this one talks about the flood sweeping over the land. Here's a chart that shows the many different representations of the flood in these ancient civilizations. You can follow all the way down here and see many of them, not 270, but quite a few of them here. And here's what they have in common. The green is exactly what's in the Bible. And the red is partially true of what's in the Bible. That's pretty good, that there's that much in agreement, even though these are in cultures that are thousands of miles apart and thousands of years ago. All right, so any questions or comments about the fact that the flood story is so prevalent in all of ancient cultures and is in all parts of the world, with many of the facts being very similar, if not exactly, what's in the Bible? And yet modern scholars scoff at the idea of a worldwide flood. They think, oh, it can't be true, even though the evidence is all around. Any questions? All right, make sure you bring your Bible back again tomorrow. We're going to continue looking at the flood, but then also go on to what you've already mentioned, the Tower of Babel, and see what that's all about.